All right, so we're back in the book of Exodus, chapter 18. If you have a Bible, you can open up there. If you were with us last week, you remember the ride that we were on. Israel is 3 days out from the greatest worship moment of their lives, singing on the seashore of after God has parted the Red Sea, and they get to the wilderness and they start grumbling right away. Right? They show up in one place and there's bitter water, then they've got no food, and then they've got no water. And in every single place, God shows up and he heals and he provides. The rock was struck and water floods out for a thirsty and undeserving people. And then we ended with this image. And the image was Moses is on a hill, and when his arms are raised, Israel prevails, but when his arms drop, the enemy gains ground. And Moses can't sustain it alone, and so Aaron and Hur come alongside him, they hold him up, and the battle is won. And that image is a perfect setup for today, because Exodus 18, God shows up to say something to the greatest leader in Israel's history that I think a lot of us need to hear, and he does it through an unlikely outside voice. So this is what it says in Exodus chapter 18, verse 1, it says, Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard all that God had done for Moses and for Israel, his people. So the chapter opens up with a Gentile hearing the story of the Exodus. And this is so key to really understanding this chapter. Jethro is a Midianite priest. He's outside of the covenant entirely because he's a Gentile. But he hears what God did, the plagues, the Passover, the enemy being swallowed up, the sea opening up, right? And something in him moves. And so he comes to see the people of God in the wilderness to visit his son-in-law. And I was reading this last week and I was just reminded that God's redemptive acts are not just for the people in the room. There's always a testimony being written for watching people. The Exodus was not a private transaction between God and Israel. It was a public declaration of who God is, right? The nations are meant to see the goodness and greatness of God, the majesty of God. That's why over and over and over again, we hear God say in Exodus, I will get glory over the Egyptians. That's what I'm doing. And man, I truly believe that what God is doing within our River City family, we get to see a tiny glimpse of that same thing. Like the stories of what's happening in our family, I don't know if you've been able to see it, but I have seen people finding Jesus. I've seen marriages being restored. I've seen lives being put back together. And I want you to know something. Wausau is watching. And God is using that story to draw people in. But I want to be careful, because Jesus said it very plainly. Jesus did not say, by this, all people will know that you're my disciples by your worship gatherings. He didn't say by your music. He didn't say by how many people show up on a Sunday or how good you think something is. He said, by this, all people will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. The witness is the community. The thing that stops the watching world in its tracks is not a church that has great Sunday morning gatherings. It's a church that actually loves each other. A family where the outsider walks in and feels something that they can't explain and can't find anywhere else. And that's what I believe God's called us to build. Not an audience, a family. And I am absolutely convinced that family, like truly loving each other well, carrying each other's burdens, sitting at the table together, is one of the most powerful apologetics in Wausau. Look at what happens to Jethro in verse 5. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons and his wife to Moses in the wilderness, where he was encamped at the mountain of God. There's something so significant here that's really easy to miss. This is not Jethro's wife and Jethro's sons. This is Moses' wife and his sons. So Moses' wife, Zipporah, and her two sons have been sent away, likely for their protection during the plague. So Moses has been out here leading this people through the wilderness, and his family's been somewhere else. And now on the other side of the Exodus, on the other side of the Red Sea, on the other side of the provision and the battle, his family comes back to him. But I want you to feel the weight of that for a second. Moses has been leading a nation. Moses is judging disputes. Moses is carrying everything, and his family's been away. We'll come back to that. Verse 8. Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardship that had come upon them in the way and how the Lord had delivered them. So he tells the whole story, not just the highlight reel, everything, the hardship and the deliverance. And I just want to remind you, family, your testimony is a theological act. It rehearses the character of God before witnesses. That's what a testimony is. This is one of those things that we walk through together in Gospel Foundations, how to tell your story with Jesus as a hero. And I just want to sit for a second because I think some of us have a story that we've never told out loud. Like, I know people who have called themselves Christians for years. I'm talking 10, 20, 30 years and have never shared the grace of what God has done in their lives with anyone else. I know people who have been walking with Jesus in the way that they would say that and have never shared the gospel with anyone. And maybe you're sitting here today and God has done something really real in your life. Like he pulled you out of something or he restored something. He showed up in a season where you had nothing left and he came through and you know that it happened, but you never said that to another person. And maybe because it feels too personal, or maybe because you're not sure anyone would care, or maybe it's because the hardship that came before the deliverance is still a little embarrassing to admit. But tell the story. Not the cleaned up version, not the version where you skip straight to how God fixed it. The whole thing, the hardship and the deliverance. That's what Moses did. And it's what changed everything for Jethro. And then maybe you're sitting on the other side of that. Like you're sitting here going, I don't really have a testimony. I don't have a dramatic moment that changed me. I wasn't saved from addiction. I didn't have some road to Damascus moment. Can I just tell you something? The fact that you're here, that Jesus found you, that you're his, that you've been forgiven and called and adopted into the family of God, that's a story. And it's enough. It's always been enough. Revelation 12, verse 11, it says, the people of God overcame the enemy by the blood of the Lamb and by what? The word of their testimony. Your story is a weapon. It is a witness. It is a thread to the larger testimony of what God is doing in this city, and the watching world needs to hear it. And watch what it does to Jethro, verse 9. And Jethro rejoiced for all the good that the Lord had done in Israel, and that he had delivered them from the hand of the Egyptians. Jethro said, blessed be the Lord, who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of Pharaoh, and has delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Listen to this in verse 11. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods. This is a Gentile doxology, a pagan priest confessing the supremacy of Yahweh. Our testimonies matter. And then verse 12. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrifices to God. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law before God. This may not seem like a big deal to you, but this is a huge deal. This is an outsider, a Gentile outsider, a pagan, eating with the family of God. And this is a beautiful foretaste of something, of a table that Jesus would set, not just for Israel, but for every tribe, tongue, and nation, a table where the outsider is welcomed in. And that's what's happening. I mean, think about what's happening here. This is a Gentile sitting at a Jewish table that is not normal. For thousands of years, there was a wall. Jew and Gentile, insider and outsider, clean and unclean. And the table was the boundary. Who you ate with told everyone exactly where you stood. And then Jesus shows up and he starts eating with all the wrong people. And the Spirit falls not just on Israel, but on every nation under heaven. And then Paul writes that wall has been torn down, that there's no longer Jew or Gentile, that the mystery that was hidden for ages has finally been revealed, that the Gentiles are fellow heirs, members of the same body, partakers of the same promise. And I just want you to know that that's us. Right? We're the Gentiles at the table. We had no claim. We had no covenant. We had no history with this God. And yet here we are, adopted, welcomed, and seated. And this is why we like food so much around River City. You know? It's not just because we like eating, although we do. Every time we gather around the table as the family of God, we're living out something that the prophets long to see. A foretaste of a great feast to come. The wedding supper of the Lamb, where every tribe, tongue, and nation will sit down together, and the one at the head of that table will be Jesus. We're not just sharing a meal, we're rehearsing eternity. Verse 13. The next day Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood around Moses from morning till evening. This is the morning after the meal, right? The morning after Jethro worships, joins the table, everyone goes to bed full and grateful. Moses wakes up the next morning and gets right back to work. And Jethro watches it all day. The line never ends. People coming with disputes and questions and needs, and Moses is handling every single one of them from morning until evening. And then Jethro, this wise outside voice, sees something in Moses that he can't see about himself. Look at verse 14. And then Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for the people, and he said, what is this that you're doing for the people? Why do you sit alone and all the people stand around you from morning until evening? And Moses has an answer ready. Verse 15, because the people come to me to inquire of God. Like, he's not being defensive. He really believes that this is his job. He's over-functioning out of a sincere sense of responsibility. And Jethro doesn't question his heart. He just questions the structure. Look at verse 17. What you're doing is not good. You and the people will certainly wear yourselves out, for this thing is too heavy for you. You are not able to do it alone. I want to be honest with you about something. I love being your pastor. I love this church. I love this city. I love what God is doing here, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. And our church is growing, which means more people, more needs, more pastoral moments, more conversations, more everything. And I feel it. And it's not just as a burden, as a deep privilege, but I have to be honest. There are moments where I'm not as available as I want to be, where someone has needed me, and I was already spent, where I got home to Andrea and the kids, and I had nothing left. And I felt the weight of all this, and I wondered, like, if I actually knew how to carry it well. And I've come to understand, and what this text is teaching me, that the greatest gift that I can give to River City is not to be a more available pastor. It's to be a healthy one. To be a present husband. To be a present dad. A man who is spiritually grounded and not running on empty. That's what we actually need. And I cannot be that if I'm trying to be everything to everyone. But here's what I want you to hear. This isn't just a pastor problem. Because you're doing the same thing in your life. It's the mom who can't ask for help because she's supposed to hold it all together. It's the husband who carries every financial worry alone because that's just what a provider does. It's the friend who's always having to be the strong one, the one who people are always having to call, the one who always has to show up and nobody ever asks if they're okay. It's the leader at work who doesn't know how to delegate because no one else will do it right. It's the person who's built their entire sense of worth around being needed. And Jethro's words land on all of us. Like, what you're doing is not good. You will certainly wear yourselves out. You're not able to do it alone. And I want you to notice something underneath that, because the question is never just about structure. It's always about identity. Always. Why do we overfunction? Why do we do that? Why do we refuse to let go? Why do we allow these things to overwhelm us so much? Because here's the reality, this is so true, not just for me, I really believe it's for you. It's because our worth has got tangled up in our usefulness. Because being needed feels like being loved. Because the moment we stop carrying everything, listen, we're afraid of what's actually left. Afraid that if we're not indispensable, then we might not matter. And the gospel has something to say about that. Come to me, Jesus says, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And Jesus doesn't say that because you're weak. He says it because he designs you with limits on purpose. Your insufficiency is not a flaw. It's the feature. It's the thing that drives you back into dependence on God and into genuine community with others. And so hear this, and I'm listening for myself. You are not loved because of what you carry. You are loved because of what Christ carried. And that freedom, if you actually receive it, man, I can promise you that it'll make you the most burden-sharing, trust-extending, help-accepting person in any room. Moses didn't need to carry this alone, and neither do you. And so Jethro gives him a layout of here's how you do this. And he tells him all the different things. And I love how he says it in verse 21. Moreover, look for able men from all the people, men who fear God, who are trustworthy, and hate a bribe. And place such men over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. So before Jethro lays out the structure, he lays out character. And I want you to notice the order. They fear God. They are trustworthy. They hate a bribe. So character before competency. The fear of God before ability. Right? These are not just capable people. They are people who live under God's authority before they exercise any authority over others. They're not in it for the influence. They're not in it for themselves. They fear God first. And this is the consistent pattern in Scripture. The 70 elders in Numbers 11, God distributes His Spirit on them. And the 7 in Acts chapter 6, when they said that they're men of good repute, full of the Spirit and wisdom, chosen so that the apostles can stay in prayer and in the Word. Elders and deacons appointed in every church in 1 Timothy chapter 3 and in Titus chapter 1. The pattern never changes. God's design has always been distributed leadership rooted in character. And here's what I want to tell you, man. I got to be honest about this. We have a wonky definition of the word pastor in American Christianity. In fact, I will tell you that the way that most people use in American Christianity, use the word pastor, you cannot find in this book. Because we've taken the idea of pastor and turned it into a superhero role, a person who preaches and counsels and leads and casts vision and does hospital visits and follows up on guests and disciples new believers, has to be the political voice of every headline, and still somehow you have a healthy family. And if you screw up on any of it, you're done. And we've built entire church cultures around that one person's gifts and availability. And here's the crazy thing. It's not what the Scripture describes. In fact, in Ephesians chapter 4, Paul says that God gave the church apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, and teachers. 5 distinct gifts, 5 distinct functions. No one person is all those things at once. And look at what he says their purpose is. Verse 12, to equip the saints for the work of ministry. You know what that means? This will sound weird. The leaders don't do the ministry. The leaders equip the saints for the work of ministry. The work of ministry belongs to the body. And what's the work of ministry? Verse 13, that we all obtain unity in the faith, that we grow into maturity, and that we become the full stature of Christ together. This is not a handful of professional Christians doing ministry while everyone else watches. It's a whole people being built up together. And the picture that gets me every time is Acts chapter 2. I mean, Peter preaches, 3,000 people come to faith in a single day. Can you imagine what we would do? 3,000 people come to faith in a single day, and there's no building, no staff, no structures, no systems, no Sunday services to funnel them into. So where did they go? Well, Acts 2 tells us. And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. And day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts. Now, I want to pause here because it's easy to read, attending the temple together and think, see, they had a Sunday service. That's our weekend gathering. No. That's not quite what's happening here. If you know the history of the temple in Jerusalem was not a church building. It was the center of Jewish public life. It's a place where the whole city gathered, where commerce happened, and where culture happened, where conversations happened. The early believers were not retreating to a private religious club. They were showing up to the most public space in the city together as a visible community, as a witness. It's actually closer to what we'd call like the presence in a public square than what we'd call a Sunday service. Think about it less like a worship gathering on a Sunday morning and more like showing up all together at the Pinery, which you should do. But anyways, I'm biased. Or like us gathering together at a public park or being visibly present in the life of the city as a people who belong to Jesus. And then after they were in the city together, they went home into homes. Into houses, around tables. This is where pastoral care happened. This is where people were actually known. And so the early church had 2 movements, visible in the presence of the city and a deep community in homes. And one was a witness to the watching world, and the other was the infrastructure that sustained the people. Both mattered. You cannot replace one with the other. They went into homes, they cared for one another, they broke bread together, they prayed together. They didn't wait for a single pastor to do it all. They were the ministry. And this is what we believe God has called us to do at River City. This is why we launched house churches. Not a program, not a small group strategy. It's us doing our very best to try to recover what the church was always designed to be. Pastoral care distributed across a community of people who actually know each other and carry each other. And so for us, I want to help kind of give you the layout of what that looks like for River City, just to kind of keep us on the same thing. This will be really helpful for some of you who are newer to the family. River City is a non-denominational church. We don't have a backing with another church that sent us. The Lord called Andrea and I to move here and plant River City, and so I kind of parachuted in, and we started. I didn't know anyone when I moved here. Met many of you in other places. So, and then we have this is how the structure is. We have elders. Currently, these are three men who carry the spiritual oversight of the church, along with their wives. They're not yes men. They're not a board of directors. They are shepherds who fear God and who are accountable to something way higher than my opinion. And then we have a staff. That staff carries specific lanes of ministry. That's not so that you don't have to, but so that you're equipped and released to do yours. And then we have house church leaders. And this is Jethro's Leaders of Tens. This is pastoral care. The pastoral care of River City was never meant to flow primarily through a Sunday morning or through one pastor. It would crush us. It was designed to happen in living rooms, around tables, in real relationships. When your house church leader calls you to check in on you after a hard week, that's not part of a program. That's the body of Christ functioning exactly the way that God has called it to function. There was a book that I read years ago called Gaining by Losing. And there was a story in there that I've just loved, I've held on to for years. And this is how the story goes. James was a successful businessman, a wonderful father, and a prominent lay leader in his church. And he had wondered why God hadn't called him into ministry. God had radically saved him during his mid-20s, and by that point, he had already had a well-established career in industrial engineering. But James loved Jesus and wanted others to know him. He knew nothing was more important than the spread of the gospel. He loved to teach the Bible and had led several of his work colleagues to Christ. He was good at his job, but listen to this. He wondered why God hadn't called him to play on the varsity squad of full-time ministers. There is a widespread myth in the American church that a calling into ministry is a secondary experience that happens to only a few privileged Christians, where we believe that God takes the spiritually elite and entrusts them with the ministry, and for everyone else, their responsibility is to show up faithfully at the events planned by the ministers and foot the bill. And I believe with my entire being that there are few lies that cripple the mission of God more than that one. I want to tell you this, family. The call to leverage your life for the mission of God is not a sacred experience that God extends to a select few. The call to leverage your life for the gospel was included in your call to follow Jesus. The moment you decided to follow Jesus, you accepted a call to full-time ministry. Not a call to a stage, not a call to a title, a call to the people around you. A call to ministry is not for professional Christians. It's for every single follower of Jesus. You are not a spectator in my ministry or someone else's ministry. In fact, Peter says that you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness and into his marvelous light. A royal priesthood, not a few priests with a crowd watching. Every follower of Jesus is a carrier of his presence into the world. That's the design. It goes on and says in verse 24, Moses listened to the voice of his father-in-law and did all that he said. One sentence. I love this. Don't skip it. The man who spoke with God face to face, who parted the sea, who led 1 million people through the wilderness, who received the law from God himself on Sinai, that man heard an outside voice from a pagan and changed. He didn't debate it. He didn't defend himself. He didn't say, you don't understand the weight that I'm carrying. He listened. And he did all that he said. This is what genuine humility looks like. And I just want to camp here for a second because I think this is one of the many struggles that we're carrying, many of us individually. Because we live in a culture that doesn't like to be challenged. We don't like to be told what to do. We've made personal autonomy the highest value. My truth, my way, my call. Right? And that spirit has seeped into the church in ways that we don't always recognize. It shows up in leadership. It's the person who can't receive feedback without getting defensive. The leader who explains away every critique. The one who surrounds themselves with people who only affirm them because agreement feels like loyalty and any kind of challenge feels like betrayal. And so they never grow and the people around them pay the price. But it also shows up spiritually. And this is one of the more subtle and dangerous ones. It's the person who's been hearing the same thing from God for months, maybe longer. The same nudge in prayer, the same verse keeps finding them, the same conviction that rises every time they get quiet. And every time it comes, they have this reason why it doesn't apply right now. Why the timing isn't right or why their situation is different. And it's the person who's learned to navigate around parts of Scripture to make them, that make them uncomfortable, who love the grace passages but skim past the holiness ones. Who receives the comfort of the gospel but resists the commands of the gospel. Who wants Jesus as Savior but keeps him at arm's length as Jesus as Lord. But here's what I don't want us to miss. Because Jethro is not a burning bush, and he wasn't an angel. He's not some dramatic moment of divine intervention. He was a person, an outside voice, someone in Moses' life who saw something that Moses couldn't see in himself and loved him enough to say it. And God uses that. He sends people into our lives to speak truth into us. And the question is whether or not we're humble enough to receive it. It could be the spouse who's been trying to tell you the same thing for years. Or the friend who loves you enough to have a hard conversation. Or the mentor who sees a blind spot that you keep defending. Or maybe it's someone outside your circle entirely, like Jethro, who has no agenda, no politics, no skin in the game, and he says the thing that no one else is willing to say. It's not an attack, it's a gift. And a proud heart will dismiss it every time. And here's what I want to say as gently and as directly as I can. A heart that cannot be corrected cannot be led. And a heart that cannot be led cannot lead anyone else. Moses was not diminished by receiving Jethro's counsel. He was freed by it. The correction didn't make him less. It made the mission greater. And that's always what genuine humility does. It opens your hand. It makes room for what God does, what only he can do. So the question is not whether God is speaking, whether that's through his word or through his spirit or through the people that he's placed in your life. The question is whether you're the kind of person who, like Moses, will actually listen and do all that he said. Now, I want to be honest with you about something. What I just got done talking about, this idea of distributed leadership and priesthood of all believers and equipping the saints for the work of ministry, I've believed that for years. That's a conviction of why we started River City. It's baked into our DNA, and yet the enemy has a way of making you forget what you know. Slowly. And it's not like a big moment of failure. It's like this steady accumulation of needs and opportunities and people who need something and genuine love for them that makes you say yes one more time. And before long, you're back at the same place that Moses was, morning till evening. And the line never ends. I think there's something in us, all of us, that longs to be of value to others. Or that wants to be needed. That gets its sense of worth from showing up and coming through. And that longing is not evil, it's human. God put it there. But the enemy takes it and twists it just enough, and suddenly you're taking on more than you were designed to carry. Not just because you're power hungry, and not because you are prideful, but because you love people and can't stand the thought of letting them down. And in the meantime, you get so busy doing the work of God, you forget to be a man of God or a woman of God. And I'll tell you, again, that's not just a pastor problem. It's the mom who hasn't had a quiet moment alone with Jesus in 3 months because everyone else needs something from her and she can't figure out how to stop giving long enough to receive. It's the businessman who's built something really good and is really proud of it, and somewhere along the way the business became his identity and his family got what was left over. It's the ministry leader who's been serving in 3 different capacities, showing up for everyone and privately running on fumes, but would never say so because they don't want to look like they can't handle it. It's the person who's been so busy solving everyone else's problems that they haven't sat quietly before God in longer than they can remember. We get so busy doing the work of God that we forget to be a person of God. And here's what I want to say. You got to hear this. It's not faithfulness. It's not sacrifice, and it's not what Jesus asked of you. He told us to abide, to remain, to stay connected to the vine so that the fruit comes from him, not from our own striving and straining. Jesus said, I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, it is he that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do what? Nothing. Apart from me, you can do nothing. Not less efficiently, nothing. Moses changed and listened, and the greatest leaders are always the most teachable ones. Not because they're weak, but because they're secure enough in God's love to not need to be indispensable. I want to be that kind of leader. I want us to be that kind of church who hold our roles loosely, who receive wisdom from unexpected places, who are honest about our limits, who build something together that none of us would be able to build alone. But I also want to be really clear about something because before we move on, because I think there's a misread that could come really easily from this kind of conversation. So don't hear what I'm not saying. This is not an excuse for laziness. You go all the way back to the beginning of the Bible, before the fall, before sin entered the world, before anything was broken, God put Adam in the garden and gave him work to do. Genesis 2, verse 15. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it. That's in Genesis 2, not Genesis 3. Work was not a result of the curse. Work is not what happened to us when things went wrong. Work is what God designed us for when everything was all right. The curse didn't create work, it made work harder. But the dignity of work, the call to build and tend and cultivate and create, that's written into what it means to be human. It's part of the image of God in you. And so this is not a permission slip to coast, to check out, to hand things off so that you don't have to work as hard. What Jethro was actually calling Moses to do is actually harder work. Not easier work, because it's always easier to do something yourself than to develop someone else to do it. It's always faster to just handle it than to invest in the person beside you and teach them and trust them and let them fail a little and build them into someone who can carry real weight. That's the harder work, and it's the most important work. The parent who does everything for their kids is not serving them. The leader who never develops anyone around them is not being faithful or trying to be efficient. And there's a difference. Efficiency gets the task done. Faithfulness builds people. And building people is slower and messier. Man, it's way more costly over time. Or in short time, but over time it's way better. But it's exactly what God designed you for. And so yeah, delegate, release, build structure, surround yourself with people who can carry weight with you, but do the work of developing them, invest in them, pour into them, trust them with real responsibility. That's not laziness, it's the highest form of leadership. Like Moses didn't hand off cases to random people and just walk away. He found the right people, he put them in place, and he built something that would outlast him. That's the call. Not to do less, to build more. In closing, let me say this. I heard this quote years ago. It is success is in succession. Success is in succession. It literally is in the word succession, success. I don't know where I heard it from. I'd like to say that I came up with it, but I don't know. Like true success is whatever God has given you to do is not measured by what you built. It's measured by whether it outlasts you. Look at Moses. He spent 40 years leading Israel through the wilderness. And before he died, he didn't just hand off a title. He poured himself into a young man named Joshua, and he commissioned him. And he stood before the whole congregation and said in Deuteronomy chapter 31, "Be strong and courageous. Do not fear or be in dread of them, for it is the Lord your God who goes with you. He will not leave you or forsake you." Moses knew that he wasn't going to go into the promised land, but he made sure somebody was ready who would. That's succession. That's success. And then look at Paul, one of the greatest leaders in the church has ever seen. Church planner, theologian, apostle, a man who was beaten, shipwrecked, imprisoned, and still couldn't stop preaching the gospel. And near the end of his life, writing from a prison cell, he says this to Timothy: "And what you've heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also." 4 generations in one verse. Paul to Timothy, Timothy to faithful men to others. Paul's definition of success was not the churches that he planted or the letters he wrote. It was whether this thing that he carried would move on after he was gone. The call for every one of us is this. Not just pastors, not just leaders with titles. The parent investing in your kids, the mentor pouring into the younger person at work, the house church leader who's developing someone beside you, the person who's faithful in the small thing, building something that will outlast them. Success is in succession. Build it in a way that outlasts you. I love Exodus 18. I've had a blast studying this week. And I'll be honest, I've been incredibly convicted. But it's not the destination. It's always a signpost, man. Everything points back to Jesus. Every thread that we pulled on today, the limits of human leadership, the distribution of mission, the development of people, the idea of success and succession, all of it finds its fullest expression in Jesus. I mean, think about what Jesus did. He didn't just gather a crowd. He gathered 12 ordinary, unimpressive, confused men, fishermen, tax collector, a zealot, men who argued about who was the greatest while he was trying to prepare for the cross. Men who fell asleep in the garden when he asked them to pray. Men who ran when things got hard. And he poured himself into them anyway. For 3 years, not from a stage, around tables, on the road, in hard conversations. In the moments after they failed, he developed them. He invested in them. He entrusted them with real things and let them struggle and pick them back up and kept going. And then the night before the cross, he said something that had to have confused them in that moment. I can't imagine being in this place. You're sitting around with Jesus at the table, and Jesus goes, I tell you the truth. It is for your advantage that I go away. For if I do not go away, the helper will not come to you. But if I do go, I'll send him to you. It's to your advantage that I go away? How is that possible? How is the physical absence of Jesus better than his presence? Because Jesus is about to do something that no human leader has ever been able to do. He's about to distribute himself. Not delegate tasks to people and hope they figure it out. Actually pour out his spirit into every single one of his people. And so that the presence that had been walking with these 12 men in Galilee would now be living inside every believer in every city, in every generation until he comes back. Last week was Pentecost Sunday, right? 50 days after the resurrection. The disciples are in the upper room and the Spirit comes, rushing wind, tongues of fire. Suddenly, these same men who ran from a servant girl in a courtyard are standing on the streets of Jerusalem, preaching with a boldness that the city stops in its tracks. Like Jesus didn't leave them with instructions, he gave them himself. That's the succession that makes every other succession possible. Moses poured into Joshua. Paul poured into Timothy. Jesus poured himself, his actual spirit, into his church. And that spirit has been moving through ordinary people in ordinary places, doing extraordinary things ever since. You know, the last Sunday of every month, we take communion as a way to remember. And I was thinking about this scripture, and I just want to take you back to verse 12 for a moment. It says, and Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrifices to God, and Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law before God. Again, this is a Gentile, right? Outsider, man with no claim on the covenant of Israel, and he's eating at the table with the family of God. And like I told you, like this is a foretaste. This is a preview of something coming that's bigger and better and wider than anything that Israel could have ever imagined in that moment. Because there's another table. The table that Jesus sets the night before he goes to the cross. The same night that he said, it's better that I go away. And he gathers his people around that table and he takes bread and he breaks it and he says, this is my body given for you. And he takes the cup and he says, this is my blood poured out for the forgiveness of sins. And that table is not just for Israel. It's for every tribe, tongue, and nation. It's for the outsider and the insider. It's for the person who has it all together and the person who's barely holding on. It's for the pastor and the brand new believer. It's for every one of us who've been trying to carry something that we were not designed to carry. Because here's what the cross is. It's the place where Jesus took on everything that we couldn't carry alone. The sin, the shame, the striving, the weight of trying to be enough, the exhaustion of performance, the burden of being indispensable, the identity that's wrapped up in usefulness, the fear that if you stopped carrying it all, something will fall apart. He took all of it in his body on the cross. And he didn't do it because you earned it. He didn't do it because your faith was strong enough or your performance was good enough. He did it while we were still grumbling at Rephidim. While we were still asking, is the Lord even here? While we were still morning and evening trying to hold it all together with our own strength. But God showed his love for us that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. while we were still. That's grace. Not grace because you finally got it right. Grace because he's good and you're loved and the cross was enough. The table is a declaration of that. That every time we eat this bread and drink this cup, we're saying, I'm not holding myself together. He is. I'm not carrying what's too heavy for me. He already did. I'm not loved because of what I carry. I'm loved because of what he carried. And so today I want to invite you to come to the table, not with your performance, not with your record, not with how well you've been doing or how much you've been carrying. Come tired. Come honest. With weak arms that can't be held up without people around you. Come with empty hands. Because the table was always set for people like us. And Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, for as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. So let's come to the table together this morning.